here today to talk to you as a citizen, as a feminist, as a human rights activist, a progressive, and as someone who identifies with the left, but who feels that the stopist, so-called left, has betrayed their conscience. And as a person would and should want and expect Canada and Canadian troops to stay, to allow for reconstruction and democratization and what few opportunities for liberation the Canadian President provides. The NATO-led ISAF effort as part of a multilateral, UN-designed and backed initiative is a better prospect than the alternative, and to deny that simple and plain fact is to betray the Afghan people. Thank you.
I say this after every debate, and I say it even more strongly this time. One of the great joys of this for me, and I hope for you, is that the arguments are always muscular and so well informed and so rich in detail. It's really wonderful. Let's thank our two speakers first. I think we can also agree that while the local papers have their occasional good reasons to be read, you can't really get a thorough appreciation of what's going on in some place like Afghanistan by reading the Sun or the Province. They just don't have it. So thank goodness for the. They just, understatement, yeah. They just, look, I'm being kind, I work for the province. They have their strengths, but this isn't one of them. So thank goodness that God gave us Google, because now we can go to things like Asia Times, and I'm sure there are even much better sources than Asia Times, but even Asia Times in the last 2 days has given phenomenal stories on recent activities of the Taliban, and I won't go on about it, but simply to say that if the Asia Times reports are reasonably accurate, the Taliban has never been more active, never healthier, and they're in the middle of a three-pronged attack that they're rolling out as we speak, and they will be stronger than ever. So we have to wonder how strong the Canadian presence or NATO presence can be. One wonders if you're going to do a job, go in and do a job, either do it right or don't do it. In any event, that's me. So now we'll begin the question period, and we'll start with, sorry, we'll get to all of you first, but we're going to first have one of our instructors from Langara College set off the question period. That's Peter Pronzos. Peter Pronzos teaches political science. He has a degree in political science and in psychology. He's working on a couple of books, one on psychotherapy, one on human nature and community. He is a dual citizen of Canada and the United States, spent 2 years in the Marine Corps in San Diego, working out of San Diego during a certain war that we all remember, the Vietnam War. And he ran for the NDP provincially in 2001, and he's a founding member, a former member of the Peace and Justice Committee here in Vancouver. And Peter, I'll ask you to direct.
For each of you, and I will start with Derrick. Actually, Lauryn brought up a really good point that I'd like to hear your response to. She said, what is the alternative to a NATO/UN presence in Afghanistan? Given the fact that I think many people would argue the Taliban are fascistic, intolerant, not terribly pro-human rights. Some of the other players in Afghanistan include, drug lords, various provincial or warlords, and so on. Wouldn't it be quite likely that without at least the hope that there can be some kind of stability imposed from the outside with the permission of the Afghan government, wouldn't it, if NATO pulled out, if the US and Canada pulled out, wouldn't it lead, as Lauryn said, to a tremendous bloodbath and perhaps even the resurgence of the Taliban?
Please, question. Yeah. Please, yeah.
Well, this is, and I want to make clear, when I was citing the Senless Council reports on the popularity for the Taliban, what I was arguing was that it's the very counterinsurgency war that NATO has been fighting that has been able to, in any sense, re-legitimize forces identifying themselves with the former Taliban regime, which was hated. Now, remember, in '96, when the Taliban swept into Kabul, at the behest of Benazir Bhutto, leader of Pakistan at the time, and with the tacit approval of the United States and the West, the Taliban was welcomed by most of the people in Afghanistan as a lesser evil to the warlordism and massacres that had taken up to 80,000 lives in Kabul alone during the Civil War. Okay? So that's the backdrop to what we did, because what our governments did in 2001 was they came in, they invaded, they drove the Taliban out within weeks, right? And they weren't invited in by the government of Karzai. They set up the government of Hamid Karzai. They told the Afghan tribal elders that they gathered together, Karzai's our man. He's a Pashtun, we need that aspect of it. And they made the decision to ally themselves with these warlords who were completely discredited in the eyes of the Afghan people. Saif, Rabbani, Dostum, the list goes on. These people have thousands of deaths on their hands. And what should have been done, what would have been done if this was any kind of just intervention, if you can have such a thing in a world dominated by great powers, what would have happened was those warlords would have been disarmed. They would have been brought up on trial in Afghanistan by the Afghan people and given the justice that they deserve. Not given pride of place in the Loya Jirga to make the new Afghan constitution, not given regions of the country to control de facto on behalf of the US NATO occupation. Those people would have been put in jail, would have been tried by the Afghan people. But that opportunity was never there. This is why this whole operation has been discredited. And when you bomb civilians and displace them, it doesn't help. Now, people like Gwynne Dyer, again, I'll bring him up. He thinks that the US will be pulling out at some point, that this war is lost. And what will happen then is that, a series of negotiations are already underway. Karzai is negotiating with the Taliban, by the way. Remember how Jack Layton was pillared for making that suggestion. I don't personally have any opinion I don't think that's our job to recommend. I think our job is to deal with what Canada is complicit in now. But the fact is, negotiations on the post-NATO Afghanistan are already underway between a number of unsavory actors that we've empowered and we've emboldened. Beginning with, I might add, creating the domination of fundamentalism in Afghanistan in the 80s, creating the Taliban rule, okaying it, opening all of this. So when Malalai Joya says, if we pull out, if the Western forces pull out, there will be a civil war, you have to listen to the second part of what she says. She says, if the West stays doing what it's doing now for more years, the eventual civil conflict is being worsened by the foreign intervention. The eventual result for the Afghan people will be worse. So it's not just Joya. Groups like RAWA, the Women's Association of Afghanistan, Revolutionary Women's Association of Afghanistan, many other progressive-minded groups in Afghanistan at first were not really opposed to the invasion of Afghanistan in a real way. They said, this might be the lesser evil. We've never trusted foreign invaders, but the Taliban's terrible. Let's see what happens. Well, they've seen what happened. And that's why groups like RAWA are now saying, if you can't help out, get out. And that's the moral responsibility we have to be concerned about Canadians as Canadians, is what we're responsible for. The human suffering, the empowerment of warlords, extremists, and the direct deaths that are being caused by Canadian bullets and US and Canadian bombing in Afghanistan. That's our primary moral responsibility. And the Afghan people deserve the opportunity to work out their own future, to have self-determination. Thank you.
I just want to actually go back to the criticism of the media coverage in Canada. I agree it's been atrocious, and one of the strategies I've engaged in to get around that is actually reading news coming out of Afghanistan. And Afghanistan, fortunately, has a ever-growing, very dynamic, independent media. It's obviously, as we know, experienced its challenges in terms of censorship and so on. But there are some very reliable news sources in Afghanistan, in particular Pajwak Afghan News. And if you're interested in news on women's issues in Afghanistan as well as in the broader Muslim world, the network Women Living Under Muslim Laws is an excellent source of news information. in just going back